You are listening to a special edition of Outside the Boards podcast celebrating Oak Brook Polo Club's 100th anniversary. I'm Danny O'Leary. Founded in 1922 by legendary businessman Paul Butler, the Oak Brook Polo Club is an American polo treasure and one of the oldest polo clubs in the United States. It was once the sport's epicenter for elite professional polo and served as home to the U.S. Open Polo Championships for 24 straight seasons and other prestigious international and national polo tournaments. Paul's primary and enduring passion was horsemanship. In 1921, Paul and his father, Frank Osgood Butler, planted the first polo field and brought polo to Oak Brook. It was in 1927, standing on the international field at Meadowbrook Polo before the start of the Westchester Cup, Paul prophesied, "Someday all this will be gone and the center of polo will be Oak Brook." Paul's prophecy came true in 1953 after the Open Championship was played in Meadowbrook. The next year, the Open moved to Oak Brook, where it would be played until 1979, the longest consecutive time the Open has been played at one location. By 1956, Oak Brook Polo Club had 13 polo fields and stabling for 400 horses, with games played 6 days a week. The club also included grandstands, bleachers, and box seats, a clubhouse, and 36 miles of tree-lined trails. Paul joined 4 polo fields so they could be used as east-west and north-south airstrips for family and incoming guests. Those guests included royalty, dignitaries, and celebrities from His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, to Hollywood's Audrey Hepburn and Vivien Leigh, and countless others visited the club. Paul also initiated and hosted a long list of international polo matches that drew legendary players from around the world. The Oak Brook team also traveled far and wide to support other clubs, and Oak Brook hosted international teams representing nearly 30 countries. Polo provided the village of Oak Brook a lifestyle appeal, a social sporting scene amplified and carried on by his son Michael and daughter Jory. It helped lay claim that polo created Oak Brook. The Oak Brook Polo Club was the largest polo plant in the world from 1954 to 1979 and would be billed the polo capital of the United States, or Polo Town. In 2022, the Oak Brook Polo Club will be celebrating its 100th anniversary, but returning to its original and masterpiece field, the Cecil Smith Field. To honor this historical occasion, the Oak Brook Polo Club has invited club friends and family to share stories of their fondest memories of visiting and playing at Oak Brook. Join us as we take listeners down memory lane with some of the sport's household names while they share their experiences at Oak Brook and the impact the club and its founders have played on their lives. Saddle up. Welcome to this Outside the Board special podcast edition with me, Danny O'Leary. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our second episode of the special edition podcast of Outside the Board celebrating Oak Brook Polo Club's 100th anniversary. Before I introduce my next guest, did you know that Oak Brook Polo Club wasn't chartered until October 31st, 1924, affiliating itself with the United States Polo Association? 2 months later, Paul's in-laws, Frank and Marjorie Strensenruder, soon after built the Oak Brook Polo Club clubhouse, which later became the clubhouse for the Butler National Golf Club, a golf club that also has a deep history in its respective sport and is still considered one of the top 100 courses in the United States today. My guest on today's podcast is Joel Baker. Joel grew up in Southern California near the Will Rogers Polo Club, where he met Ted Turner, who helped introduce him to the sport, walking ponies to and from the polo field. His work in polo helped pay for his other talent as a snow skier, where he competed on the U.S. junior ski team. At the age of 12, Joel began to stick and ball and played his first game with Bill Mavory. Joel heard about Oak Brook from his time at Santa Barbara from players like Ronnie Tong, my guest from episode 1. Joel was invited to play in Oak Brook in 1974 by Michael Butler and lived in Michael's pool house along with Stuart McKenzie and Mike Daly. You can just imagine the stories from a house of 20-somethings. Today, Joel continues to be a dear friend to Oak Brook Polo and the Butler family, and we are thrilled to have him on this special podcast. Enjoy. Joel Baker, how are you doing, buddy? Long time no talk.
Everything's great here in Santa Ynez, California.
Good deal. Well, thank you, man, for joining on this podcast and celebrating Oak Brook Polo Club's 100th anniversary. It's a huge milestone for us. And you have played a significant part in that history, as I'm told, and excited to hear kind of all about it. All the stories, the good stories, the bad stories, the stories that probably shouldn't be told, but are too good not to tell. But to kind of kick things off, Joel, tell us a little bit about yourself for those of you who don't know who you are and your relationship with the Oak Brook Polo Club.
Okay, well, I grew up near a polo field in Southern California in the LA area called Will Rogers State Park. And we moved over to this area when I was 9 years old. And I was always fascinated by horses. And so I'd go up there and the players would be tacking their horses up. And I talked to a guy named Ted Turner. I said, I'd like to help you get involved in horses. And he said, okay, well, you can walk this horse down to the polo fields. It was about a mile away. So I hand walked the horse down to the polo field. He rode in front of me and I hand walked the horse. And then between chuckers, I walked the horses. And then I got so I could walk both of them horses back to the stable. And so I would go up and I'd watch him put the bandages on and tack the horse up. And finally I asked him, I said, it'd be okay if I take one of your bridles home and clean it? And he says, sure. And so I started doing that.
How old were you at this time?
I was about 9 years old.
9 years old. Okay.
And so then my mother got me a bareback pad. And so then started letting me ride. These horses are really gentle, plumb gentle horses. So I'd go up after school and ride them a little bit. One thing led to another. And by the time I was 12, I had a deal to feed 25 head of horses there at Will Rogers in the morning and the evening. So I get up at 6 in the morning and go up and feed these horses. And I got paid $5 a horse a month. And boy, I thought that was great. And at the same time, I was also very involved in skiing and I was on the U.S. junior ski team. And so I'd take that money I'd make from feeding the horses and that'd help me buy skis. So one thing led to another and I started riding more. And then when I was about 12, a guy by the name of Bill Mabry showed up and he started letting me stick a ball with him because I'd watch these guys play and then I'd go home and try it on my bicycle. So we had a hell of a bicycle polo team in our neighborhood playing bicycle polo. And so I could hit the ball and he was amazed. And so I started stick and balling with him. And when I was 12, he put me in my first game down in the desert. I used to go down in the desert with him at the old polo club there. But then I was spending most of my free time or all of my winters were ski racing. But when I was 16, the Santa Barbara Polo Club was really going flat out then. That's when the Ronnie Tong and the Tong family had bought the club. And this is 1963. And I'd heard all about Oak Brook. They had gone to Oak Brook and won the U.S. Open and brought the Open out to Santa Barbara. And I played my first game there at Santa Barbara at 16. And it was like juniors against the seniors. And there was Gary Wooten, who was 4 goals, and he was 20. And there was Ronnie Tong, who was same age, and he was 4 goals, and Marshall Allen, who was 2. And they're all living together. And then they had me in there as the 4th guy. And we won this game in overtime. And Rick Graber asked me to play in the 12 goal the next weekend with Roy Barry, who was 7 goals at the time. He went on to 9, and Gary Wooten. And so then Roy got hurt. So I ended my polo career till I got out of college, but they rated me 1 goal right then. And so when I didn't make the 68 Olympic ski team, I came back to LA and started working downtown LA. And I rode well enough where guys would give me their problem horses. And that's when I met Michael Butler. And Michael was really working on hair and had moved to Santa Barbara. And he had Bob Skeen, who was a retired 10-goal player. I think Bob was 6 goals at the time. And so I started playing with them a little bit in Santa Barbara, and they invited me to come to Oak Brook in 1974. And so I lived out in the pool house there. And there was Mike Daly and Stuart McKenzie, Michael Butler. And I think it was in 74 or 75, we were at the Bath and Tennis Club. And Jory had this thing all outfitted, and she had all of her father's trophies that go back to the 20s as centerpieces. And so we're kind of dressed up in our tuxes and kind of bored to death. And I looked at Stuart McKenzie. I said, it'd be kind of interesting if when we leave, we could take those trophies with us. And he said, okay. So we got Mike Daly and Manuel Rojas, who is a good friend of ours from LA and played polo, was one of the sponsors, and Stuart McKenzie. And we walked out with 4, I think I had 2, I think we were out 6 of these prize trophies that go back to the 30s. And we didn't quite get the U.S. Open trophy out of there, but we got the rest of them out of there. And we just walked out, saying goodbye to everybody with them under our tuxes. And so we took them back, and Michael had his beautiful trophy case in his house there at Oak Brook. And so we put them in there, forgot all about it. The next morning, I'm in the kitchen fixing some breakfast, and I hear Michael on the phone, and he's talking to Jory, and he goes, "Dad's trophies, they're gone? You've been up all night? What?" And I look around the corner, and he's talking to his sister, and all of a sudden he looks in his trophy case, and he said, you can see his eyes go up, and goes, "Oh, I think I found the trophies."
I can imagine that would freak anyone out, but I think they learned their lessons not to put such prized possessions at centerpieces any longer.
Yeah, she was up all night. It was incredible. But the playing in Oak Brook and living there was really great because the pool house was just 80 yards to walk down to where the horses were being kept. And so every morning in those days, all the pros would ride their horses every morning. And even the day they played, the pros, even the sponsors, would be out warming up their own horses. And so you really learn a lot when you're riding with the top players in the country, getting ready for games and things. So I was very blessed to be able to be playing there from 74 to 78. I would fly in and out. I still kept my day job as a financial advisor in downtown LA. And then I'd fly to Chicago on Thursday night and be there sometimes 10 days. And other times I'd fly back Sunday night.
I got to imagine that outside of that, there's got to be some other fun stories between you, Mike, and Mackenzie. That's for sure. Hanging out in the pool house. I feel like that's just a recipe for trouble.
No, it was. We had some interesting times that I probably shouldn't talk about. We all were bears. Michael was the head bear, so he was bear.
Okay, I'm really curious as to how kind of that came about, because even when friends of Michael Butler and even planning for this podcast, people would email me and there'd be bear in their email name.
Yeah.
How did this kind of exclusive club kind of came about?
That's a good question. I'd have to go back and ask Michael about that. How did the bear start? Because, Baby Bear was Mike Daly, and I was Hey Bear, and Stuart was Kiwi Bear. I can't remember what Stuart was, but we all had our bear. And we'd have a formal ceremony out in the teepee where when you became a bear, you got all dressed up like an Indian and wore basically almost nothing and got initiated as a bear.
No kidding. You had to go into a sweat lodge?
Something like that, yeah. I befriended one of the higher school players in those days, a guy named Joe Barry. He hit the ball a mile, very conservative Texan. And I invited him up. In the morning, we would probably ride a horse before breakfast, and I invite him up to the kitchen for breakfast. And he was very curious because all these crazy things are happening up at the house. So I invite him up, and Michael would come visit with us. And he said, "Oh, you guys are really tame up here. I heard all these wild things going on up here."
This was Joe Barry?
Yeah, Joe Barry. Yeah.
At that time, were there still stabling for about 300 horses in the area?
Yeah, well, they're right there on the grounds that they were stabling. Most of the teams were based right there and had stabling right there in Oak Brook, right there. Very few were trailering in.
It's a shame that those stables are no longer there.
Oh, it is. The USPA had their annual meeting there. When was it? 4 years ago?
Yeah, 18. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I got lost, driving around there.
Yeah, it's different. That's for sure.
It is.
What were some of the other clubs in the 70s that were around outside of Oak Brook? Did you visit them or play them?
The only other club that I was going to was up in Milwaukee, the Eline Field. They hosted the Gold Cup. I think it was the Gold Cup. So we would play up there some of the time. That was another kind of funny thing that happened. You had the Elines, and then you had the Bushes, and the Bushes would come up out of St. Louis. And somebody got a picture of Robin Eline with a Budweiser and his, drinking a Budweiser after a hard game.
That's sacrilegious for being in Milwaukee.
Oh, I'll tell you what, Split's beer was the number one beer. It was big. It sold more beer than Bud in those days. And so there was a big billboard in downtown Milwaukee, "This Bud's for you." And it had Robin Eline drinking the Budweiser.
And this was just like a picture that was kind of captured?
Yeah, it was just, how after the game, we all pop a beer and we're just there drinking. And he was just, hot and chugging this beer down in his polo gear.
Oh my gosh. If we can find that ad,
That would be great.
that would be fantastic. We're going to have to, maybe I'll put in a request to the Bush family to say, is this floating around somewhere? How can we find this?
Andy Bush is a neighbor of mine now. He lives here.
Oh, no kidding. Okay.
He's a neighbor. And I'll give him a call and ask him if they have a copy of that. This was before, I don't know if he was born at that time, but he may know of how we can get a copy of that.
There's so much good rivalry I know between Oak Brook and the Milwaukee Polo Club back in the day.
Oh,
That's for
yeah.
sure. Isn't one of the U lines playing out there in California or still?
No, Bush, Andy Bush lives here now.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't had an E-line out here, though. They stay mostly down in Sarasota, Florida. And then I think they still play some in Milwaukee. But I think there's only one. I think one of the Suns is playing. I've kind of lost track of those guys.
Yeah, I thought it was like a Robert U line or something like that I thought I came across. And I think you're right. I think it is somewhere down in Sarasota. Wow, man, that's a lot. So how old were you then when you were having fun in the pool house?
Oh, I was in my early 20s. I was like 24, 25 in those days.
No, where did you go to school?
I was on an athletic scholarship for ski racing in Durango, Colorado, Fort Lewis College.
No kidding.
And we had the top cross country team in the country. And in those days, this is back in the 60s, you either had to be in school or you went to Vietnam. And so the whole U.S. ski team was in school there. CU, DU, Western State, Fort Lewis, University of Utah, and Dartmouth had most of the ski team members there. So, and our coach was a guy named Dolph Koos, who was the coach of the cross-country team back in 64 and 72. We had a really good cross-country skiers. Our alpine team was okay with Barney Pete, Jim Tofty, and I. We were competitive, and we had no jumpers. So the first year or two, Barney and I used to have to go off the jumps on our downhill skis just to be qualified. Because in college skiing, you have to run cross-country, go over the jump, and run downhill and slalom.
You had to do it all?
Yeah, and so I wasn't much of a jumper. I just had my downhill skis and do a tip drop or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The top cross-country skier in the country came from Durango by the name of Mike Elliott. And I actually rented a room from his mother 3 of the 4 years I was in Durango. And we had a reunion winning the NCAAs 2 years ago, a 50-year reunion 3 years ago. And it was fun getting together with all those guys. And Dolph, who's in his 80s now, his grandson is our number one bicycle rider. He in the Tour de France was our top U.S. rider, and he was the first one to win a leg in 13 years. His name was Koos. And so keep an eye out for him in the future, U.S. top bicycle rider.
Mm-hmm. I'm stumbling across a lot of correlations sometimes between people who play polo and people who do winter sports like skiing.
Oh, yeah.
Cheryl Sick was a recent one. I mean, she's a snowboarder, during the winter times, and she goes all over the place up in the Northwest. Now yourself, I think Mark Gansey is a big skier.
Mark's a big skier. Yeah, he grew up in Aspen.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of neat to draw on those relationships between the outdoorsman, big downhill skier, a little bit of an adrenaline junkie, and polo.
Our last international race of the year used to be Sugar Bowl up in Northern California. And by then, all the Europeans are ready to go to the beach. And since we live down the Pacific Palisades, which is close to the beach, they'd come down and stay with myself in the mornings. So I'd get Billy Kidd, who makes his living as a cowboy skier up in Colorado. I put him on his first horse. And he actually rode very well because when you're skiing, when you turn, you put your weight on your downhill ski. And when you play polo, the good polo players, when you want to turn to the left, you turn the right leg into the horse with your knee. And if you need to, you might give them a little bit of a nudge with your ankle, but it's the same technique. And so I find top skiers are the most natural horseback riders.
Huh. That's a very interesting analogy. Back in the day, then, would you say that your summers were spent playing polo and your winters were skiing for the most part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, mostly. Yeah. Yeah.
And were you still doing that when you were 24? You'd come to Oak Brook in the summertime and then go back to Colorado?
No, I was based in downtown LA, and then I'd go up skiing for the weekends and stuff like that. I wasn't ski racing. In my day, if you hadn't made an Olympic team by the time you're 21, you're over the hill. And it was you had to be completely an amateur. So the Americans kind of struggled for making ends meet. The Europeans were getting paid $400,000 a year to ski. So one of my ski sponsors was Head Ski Company, and they sent me 40 pairs of skis a year. And I go through and pick out the ones I'm going to use. And I sold the ones that I didn't use to friends, and that would help pay for traveling expenses. Well, Avery Brundridge, who was the head of the International Olympic team, said, "Oh, you got to turn those skis back in." And, oh, you got to tape over the names. And so then I had to file a report. We all had to file reports that we lost all these skis because you just couldn't make ends meet if you couldn't be able to, sell some of the extra equipment that you're getting.
You kind of raise a separate issue in itself when it comes to amateur sports like that, with players trying to make ends meet when so much is expected of them to be Olympic athletes.
Yeah.
They're not the mainstream sports like basketball or anything like that. They're the smaller guys. So they all have day jobs at the end of the day. And while so much is expected of them to compete at this type of level, it's just like, well, how are we supposed to get there financially? And you're here, you
Right.
are getting head skis and then selling the Astros just to get some cash in your pocket. The Oak Brook Polo Club is thrilled to announce the creation of the Friends of Oak Brook Polo. The club's not-for-profit arm, created with the mission of supporting quality recreational and competitive polo in Oak Brook through the rejuvenation and sustainability of polo activities. This will ensure the long-term health of the polo club so that it continues to thrive and host safe and competitive polo for future generations. The goal of the organization will be to raise and invest funds for maintaining and improving Oak Brook Polo Club's fields so that it remains a healthy, safe, and competitive venue for the sport of polo, and for the development of recreational polo programs to help advance the sport in the area. To learn more or to donate, please visit www.oakbrookpoloclub.com for more information, or contact us directly at info@oakbrookpoloclub.com. Thank you in advance for your support in helping to preserve the club's history and importance in the global polo community. So going back to Oak Brook, we diverted a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
In your mind, I'm assuming Oak Brook is a very special place for you.
Oh, yeah.
In your words, what does Oak Brook mean to you in the greater polo community?
You got to remember, when I was growing up, hot walking and everything, I always playing polo. And since Alan Shearer, who was also a big player in Oak Brook and played for the Butlers, he worked in LA, and he was 6 goals, and he played at Will Rogers. And so he was the best player I've ever been around, except for Bob Skeen. So I always envisioned, to be a 6-goal player. And I didn't really start playing until I was 21, 22 years old. So Oak Brook gave me the opportunity to be around the top players and really concentrate on how to become a better player and still be able to keep a day job. So I ended up going to 7 goals for about 20 years, but it was just simply because of having that opportunity that Michael Butler and the Butlers gave me to be there and be involved with all that and their support. And some of the top horses I bought were horses I was able to acquire were horses that Stuart McKenzie, who was Michael's main pro back in that day, they bring out of Argentina. And there were several mares that one was too small for him and the other was so temperamental that she would freeze on him. And, he'd be playing in the finals, quarterfinals of the U.S. Open, and this mare would just freeze and you'd have to get off and walk her off the field in the middle of the game. And so they gave her to me, and I put her in a snaffle, and I didn't ask as much out of her and everything. And she ended up being such a great horse that when I was picked to go on the Cup of the Americas team to Argentina, and we took our 53 best horses, she was one of the horses that went back to Argentina and played in Palermo. But, having that opportunity and being able to acquire that type of horse flesh makes a big difference in our world. And there was another character in Oak Brook that was very important to my whole riding and horsemanship, was James Rice.
Mm-hmm.
And James was Cecil Smith's head guy. And Cecil wasn't playing as much. He was still riding a lot of horses, and just being able to ride with Cecil and watch him and then with James. And James, he knew every horse in the field. When you sat and watched a game with James, he could tell you what each horse was going to do. And he had picked up on a couple of my horses that I had started as 3-year-olds, and he really liked them. And so he became a very good friend and a great mentor to me.
We wrote a nice article on James Rice in our Score magazine this past season at Oak Brook. A very influential individual. But it seems though a lot of people that are even now Hall of Famers today had come through Oak Brook at one point or another, or even have gotten their start here.
Well, you have to. I mean, anybody that wanted to be a good player in the 60s, 70s, had to play in Oak Brook. If you're in Argentina, you have to play in Palermo. Oak Brook or Palermo.
That's a good comparison. Absolutely. What handicap did you end up getting up to?
I was 7 goals outdoor and 8 goals indoor.
My gosh. Olympic athletes, and 7-goal polo player. That's.
I never made the Olympics, so
It sounds like you were pretty close,
my
though.
wife did, but I didn't.
But nonetheless, I mean, you were one of the best in the country if you're getting onto the junior team, that's for sure.
Growing up in LA and skiing, out of Mammoth was always amazing.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you still playing today, polo?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm in a stable right now. My office is in a stable that was built in 1932 by Daryl Zanuck. And Daryl Zanuck was a famous movie producer. He produced things like National Velvet, and he also played polo at the Riviera Polo Club. And so he built this stable, and it looks like it could be out of Kentucky. And then when they were taking his estate apart in 1952, a guy in the quarter horse business bought the stable and a couple other buildings and moved them from LA up here on this bluff in Santa Ynez Valley, north of Santa Barbara. So I bought it 40 years ago, and it's back into a polo stable, but I have some stained glass windows in my office that were back in the 30s of playing polo down in Riviera, Riviera was the center of polo like Oak Brook was in the 60s and 70s. Riviera was a center in the 30s, 40s, and early 50s.
Ah, okay.
I've always bred, raised, and trained all my own horses, and I still have 12 horses in work, and we play. Memo Gracita has moved his whole operation here 3 years ago, and we'll start our winter season in next month, and I'll play 2 to 3 days a week.
Wonderful. My gosh, that's the life. Do you have another house on a ski hill somewhere?
No, I don't. No, my mentor in skiing was a guy named Dave McCoy who built Mammoth Mountain, and he was amazing guy.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up hiring me to be there, do a lot of the planning for them, pension planning and stuff like that. So they always put me up there at Mammoth. I always had a place to stay in Mammoth. And then my folks built a house up in Lake Tahoe, and so I've never then had to buy a place to be close to the mountains.
Mm-hmm. That's great, man, that you're still knocking it around today. What do we have to do to get you to come back to Oak Brook and maybe play a little bit, or can we get you to come back for our 100th anniversary?
I'd love to. Yeah, just let me know. Love to do that.
Now, I don't know if you've heard, but we're moving back to our Sunday polo field, the Cecil Smith Field.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, super.
Yeah, we were knocked down to the Prince of Wales field, but I'm sure back in your day when that field was around, it played like a pool table. When there's no flooding or rain or issue or anything like that, it does still play like that. But with everything and the concrete buildup and so on and so forth for decades, that whole area was just deemed as a flood zone.
Well, I remember we got so much rain one year we were using a rowboat to get across it.
Yeah. Still, every time it floods, I think since Jim Jury and I took over in 2016, 4 out of the last 6 years, it's flooded down there. And every single time it does, I'm like wanting to go and buy a canoe at Dick's Sporting Goods and just for photographic, but also at the same time, grab my fishing pole because I know, there's a lot of carp that fall over from Salt Creek. But yeah, I used to hear back in the late 80s and early 90s that financially it was just too difficult to maintain that field considering all the flooding issues and training issues have. So yeah, but we're back on the Cecil Smith Field.
Oh, that's great.
After getting bumped out, the height of the recession, Butler National actually just got rid of all their target greens on top. So it's nice and flat. So I'm going to put some dormant seed in there and get this thing all ready to go for our 100th anniversary season in 2022, which you couldn't ask for a perfect time for this to happen.
In 77, you used to have the Butler International, which is the major golf tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I was out there watching, and Lee Trevino was on the green getting ready to putt when we had a lightning storm hit us. And the lightning, in those days, the flag sticks were out of aluminum. The golfers all had steel shoes.
Yeah.
And he just dropped to the ground. I mean, just whack. And he was in the hospital for 2 days after that.
No kidding.
Yeah.
This was, I'm assuming, the Western Open, right? When it was there?
They called it the Butler International.
Okay. All right. Maybe this is before they got the Western then.
Yeah, I think so.
So who was the golfer again that this happened to?
Lee Trevino.
Lee Trevino. And he was putting. Was his hand like on the flag stick or?
No, he was there on the green getting ready to putt. And the lightning hit this flag stick. You saw kind of a spark. And then you just saw him drop.
Just must have traveled through the ground somehow and met with his whatever the shoes were made out of back then.
So now they all have plastic shoes because of that. And now all the flight suits are fiberglass. In those days, they were aluminum. It was really scary.
But that's some great information. Now we have a little bit of backstory as to why things are the way they are at a golf course now.
Yeah, that was Lee Torino. About 30 years ago, I was in Florida with Debbie Couples, who was married to Freddie Couples at the time. And she introduced me to Lee Trevino. I said, the last time I saw you, you were flat out in the Oak Brook Green. And, oh, yeah, my God, you were there. Small world.
Yeah, I'll say. We developed a great relationship with the folks that run Butler National over there. I mean, it's still an all-boys club.
Yeah.
But they're in every right to kind of do that. But they've been really, really great in working with us and bringing polo back up there because we share the same ancestry. At the end of the day, the same people that built you are the same people that built us at the end of the day. So there's no reason that we can't continue to coexist with each other. It'll be exciting. It's still beautiful up there. It really is. That oak tree that everyone remembers that was like in the path of the field is no longer there.
Yeah.
You can see where it was, but yeah, it's been pulled out. So we have a nice straight field, if you will, now.
That's great. No, I remember I also play a lot of tennis. And Stevie Orthwine and his wife were really, really good tennis players. They came up, the Orthwines would come up and play as a family team. And they were characters because they had riding their horses all be in this big old box truck, they hadn't got goosenecks yet. And they kind of walk in and their tack was old and stuff. And one time Stevie was running down the polo field and his saddle started coming apart. And so trailing was this piece of tack. And then finally he fell off. And so and they didn't call timeout. Those days they didn't call timeout for those kind of stuff. So he's walking across field 2, picking up his tack and everything. There's no point around.
Is this something he tacked himself?
No, I think he had a little help tacking up, but they just using old tack. They weren't really upgrading their tack much those days.
Well, hey Joel, is there any stories that you can think of that you also want to share with our audience? Anything that pops out?
I'm sure I'll come up with a bunch more when we hang up, but it just was a real special spot. I know another time I had my lab out there, and he was always sit right by where I take my shirt off to put on the regular shirt. And Paul Butler was sitting near there. And so I had my shirt near where Paul Butler was sitting in his private little chair. And my dog was about 100 yards away. And so he would come and take the shirt back to where he's sitting. And Paul Butler would pick up, and that happened all game long. Paul would go pick the shirt up and bring it back to where he is. And then my dog would sneak over and pick up the dot shirt, take it back to where he was. And Paul said, that dog's really attached to you.
Yeah, I'll say, you're not supposed to have this. This is my owner's. But hey, Joel, I really appreciate you joining me today and kind of telling some stories and, your experience at Oak Brook. It's very meaningful as we approach this 100th year milestone for us. And we got a lot more people that we planned on sharing those stories. Actually, today, as we're talking, I have Dr. Richard Khalil.
Oh, sure.
A few hours. Mike Daly this afternoon.
Great. Well, so a baby bear for me.
Yeah.
And Khalil goes flying with me a lot. And so I call him Sky King. So when you address him, say, oh, hey, Sky King.
I will do that. I'll make a note of that.
And tell baby bear to give him like this.
Yeah. And we hope to have you guys all back here for the 100th anniversary. We're looking to bring back the polo ball. Which would be fantastic. The Butler International Cup is turning into an international tournament, and just being back on the Cecil Smith Field is really exciting. But thank you again, Joel. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Well, hopefully we'll see you soon.
Okay. Look forward to it. Keep me posted.
The Oak Brook Polo Club is thrilled to announce the creation of the Friends of Oak Brook Polo. The club's not-for-profit arm created with the mission of supporting quality recreational and competitive polo in Oak Brook through the rejuvenation and sustainability of polo activities. This will ensure the long-term health of the polo club so that it continues to thrive and host safe and competitive polo for future generations. The goal of the organization will be to raise and invest funds for maintaining and improving Oak Brook Polo Club's fields so that it remains a healthy, safe, and competitive venue for the sport of polo and for the development of recreational polo programs to help advance the sport in the area. To learn more or to donate, please visit www.oakbrookpoloclub.com. for more information or contact us directly at info@oakbrookpoloclub.com. Thank you in advance for your support in helping to preserve the club's history and importance in the global polo community. That was a great episode. We hope you had fun listening and learning about Oak Brook Polo Club's unique and storied history. If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to listen to others as we continue to celebrate this historic season. Thanks for stopping by, my friends, and hope to see you at Oak Brook this summer.